Hello again and welcome to another of my prog review videos. Tonight I'm going to be looking at The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis, because one of the viewers commented that they'd like me to talk about this, so here goes. For me, my journey with this album began way back in 1986. I think it was July. I would have been 15 years old, and I remember buying it from W.H. Smith in Romford on cassette, and it was my very first Genesis album, and as you can imagine it blew my mind. And for about a year I listened to this album every day. I made time to sit down and listen to it because I couldn't understand a thing that was going on. You see, when you buy the cassette, there's no lyric sheet, there's no story, no graphics, nothing to work with. So for me, it was an imponderable mystery, but one that intrigued me and sustained me for over a year. So, what's to say about The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? Well, first off, it's probably the ultimate progressive rock concept album, because it has everything you need from a progressive rock album. It has a convoluted story that doesn't make any sense, great flights of fantasy, epic musical passages, and an album that spans 2 LPs. That's key to a good concept album, no? The album itself was recorded in late 1974 and released a month later in November, so it was a kind of a bit of a rush job. And for Genesis, it was an album that was produced under duress. At that time, Peter Gabriel was toying with leaving and working with William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, on a writing project that came back to the band. There were frictions within the band, and towards the end of the recording, even Stephen Hackett, whilst drunk, crushed a glass into his hand, which rendered him out of action for a while, and he was almost perilously close not to make his live commitments for the tour. And of course, a band such as Genesis went to America, toured the entire album before the public had even heard it, so that must have been something. So, what is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? Well, it's a story of a man on a journey. Is he an everyman? Not really. I think Gabriel deliberately wrote about someone out of the English norm. I mean, he could have said it in England, but he didn't. He said it in America, so it makes it more, mysterious and intriguing. And it's full of pseudo psychology, deals with life and death and, matters of trust. Of course, sex rears its ugly head, and it really is one man on a journey to find himself. And when he finds himself, he realises that he doesn't exist at all. Pretty deep stuff. So what about the music? Well, it's a game of two halves. I'm of the mind that it would have made a really great single album if it ever edited out some of the sections. Some of the songs are particularly strong, like the opening track, Fly on a Windscreen, Back in New York City, Carpet Crawlers, of course. And on the B side, I'm just going to refer to my album copy because it's been such a long time. Colony of Slippermen, The Lamia. Anyway, those are all strong tracks, and if they'd have edited them all together better, you'd have had a really strong single album. But we have a double album, and it's something we have to live with. Again, in recent years, for me, the record has kind of taken on a different twist. The track, for example, Fly on a Windshield, I mean, the lyrics from that, especially when you put it against the visuals from the towers of 9/11 collapsing and the great billowing cloud of dust moving through New York City, it makes those lyrics and that song quite unlistenable for me. But yeah, I mean, it's a strange record. It still intrigues me to this very day. It's not perfect, but there's something about it. And again, the recording of it. One thing that always struck me, again, even when you listen to the cassette version, was how the production just seemed perfect. Everything was clear. The drums were clear. It had a really big sound. And it seems like it is a natural progression. If you listen to, say, Nursery Crime, the band, very stripped back, it's all, kind of simplistic really. The only thing that dominates are the keyboards and the mellotrons and everything. And then you see the sound getting more complicated with Foxtrot, and then with Selling England by the Pound, it's almost complete. The cinematic sound of Genesis. And then they reach their nadir, their peak with this album. I mean, standout tracks, Fly on a Windshield, Back in New York City, which I say is verging on a punk song. If you listen to it, in fact, if you listen to this album, there are places in it where the band are at their most aggressive. Genesis aren't an aggressive band. They're not a rock band. An aggressive rock band. They're a band that deals with high ideas and imagery and lyricism, but on this album you do see flashes of naked aggression, Back in New York City, for example. So what's wrong with it? Some of the lyrics are just convoluted. You do need a guidebook to lead you through the album. And now, is this because Gabriel was deliberately being obtuse? There is if you listen to previous records, there is a kind of history of, deliberately hiding meaning to be clever. It's a very middle class thing to do with writing. And this is why, again, he wrote about a Puerto Rican rather than John Smith, a disenfranchised kid from Catford. It would have been a different album there and then. Unfortunately, there is very scant live footage of the band playing the record. There are, of course, the tapes of the band playing, but there is very little video and film footage of the band, so you can't really see the theatrical show that was recreated when they performed this album live. The best thing to do is to see a band called the Musical Box, which is a kind of a Genesis tribute band. Tribute band is not the word. They're more of a reenactment society for Genesis, and they do an amazing show of it. I saw them a few years ago perform The Lamb, and I do believe that next year they're touring it again, so check the listings. And they put on a nigh on perfect version of the stage show, very authentic, and if you're of a certain vintage like myself, who were too young to see it when it first went around, well worth picking up. But the really intriguing thing, and the thing that you should really check out, is if you bought the recent remaster, or haven't bought the recent remaster of the album, pick up the CD/DVD version. The DVD version, firstly, it comes in an amazing 5.1 surround sound mix. I can't guarantee it enough. You will hear the album in a completely new way. You will hear new things that you've never seen before. You will be enveloped in a warm blanket of audio mush and feel comforted and nourished at the same time. It is a very good way of witnessing the album. But the really cool thing is they worked really hard to use all the slides from the live show. Now, if you're not familiar, the band had 3 screens at the rear of the stage, and there were a number of pictorial slides projected behind the band to take to make the story move forward. These days it'll be done with LCD screens and fancy gizmos, but then it was projection onto a screen. And what they've done is they've took those slides, they still exist, they're all in the archive, and they scan these slides in and they sync them with the album, with the 5.1 release album. So when you sit down and play it, not only do you get the music, but you get a visual representation of the record. And for me, it's I think it was a perfect moment. And I still remember sitting back for my first 5.1 surround sound experience with the new version of the Lamb, and being completely blown away by it, and falling back in love with it again. It's almost a complete experience, other than seeing the band, perform it live themselves. So if you've not heard the Lamb, or not familiar with Genesis, it may be a bit of a stretch for you to hear them first. Check out Something by the Pound or Foxtrot before heading into this territory. I was a young fool, a young whippersnapper for taking this album on at such a young age. So you might need a gateway drug to get you in. But if you feel brave, check it out. See what you think. You're not going to understand it the first time around. There'll be some passages that you'll think, "What's this going on?" And there'll be other passages that are orchestral and cinematic, and other parts that you think, "Oh, that's a funny sound. What's that? Got those funny voices?" And it won't make much sense. But check it out. It really is the archetypal concept album from that period. It's an album the likes of which will never get made again. I guarantee that. So yeah, it's one of my favourites. Again, it's the only problem with it is it's 94 minutes long, and these days with a busy life, it's sometimes a bit hard to find the time to fully appreciate the album. But it is a truly great record, a truly unique record, and for that I'm going to give it 5 walking hemorrhoids out of 5. That's 5 walking hemorrhoids out of 5. So that's it. That's my review of the Lamb. That was 10 episodes of Prog Review. I still want to hear your suggestions for albums to review. Don't say, "Oh, I want you to review progressive metal or whatever." I want you to actually name albums for me to check out, because otherwise I will just carry on doing the traditional stuff, and we'll move on to some Yes or some Van der Graaf Generator again. Or I know some of you want Fripp, and maybe I'll give you Fripp next time. What do you reckon? That sounds pretty cool. So anyway, my name has been Darren Locke. You've been a wonderful audience, and I'm sure you're reaching for your copy of the Lamb even as we speak. And all I can say now is, if you're ready, are you ready? You better prog on.